Chapter 21, Employment Discrimination. Learning objectives in this chapter are the Employment at Will Doctrine, Constitutional Provisions, Civil Rights Act of 1866 and 1871, the Equal Pay Act of 1963, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as amended, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1991, and then the Age Discrimination Employment Act of 1963, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disability Act of 1999. So Employment at Will Doctrine is a contract of employment for an intermediate term, is terminable at will by either the employer or the employee. Traditional American rule governing employer-employee relations, and then restricted by the common law and state statutory expectations. Implied contract, violations of public policy, implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and then exceptions for employment at will doctrine. Public policy exception makes it unlawful to dismiss an employee for taking certain actions in the public interest, so it gives them like their freedom of speech. An implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, based on the theory that every employment contract, even an unwritten one, contains an implicit understanding that parties will deal fairly with each other. Civil Rights Act. Civil Rights Act of 1866, all persons in the United States have the same right to make and enforce contracts and have the full equal benefit of law. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1871 prohibits discrimination by state and local governments. Equal Pay Act of 1963 salutes that prohibits wage discrimination based on sex. Equal work, equal here means the same in terms of all of these four factors in act, like skill, effort, responsibility, and the working conditions. And then following the legal justifications for paying unequal wages for men and women. The remedy for those who violate the act: bring a private action under section 16b of the act and recover back in the same amount of differential pay members of the opposite sex. And then chapter 22, environmental law. The learning objectives are alternate approaches to like the environmental protection. The Environmental Protection Agency, the National Environment Policy Act of 1970, regulating water quality, regulating air quality, regulating hazardous waste and toxic substance. And then tort law is regulating pollution by using the tort of nuisance. Nuisance is unreasonable interference with someone else's use and enjoyment of his or her land. And then negligence is an alternate tort solution used when a defendant is polluting behavior harms in a plaintiff. And then alternate approaches to environmental protection. Government subsides approach. Government pays polluter to reduce their emissions. And then disadvantages firms that limit its pollutants that must still pay the difference between the actual cost and the subsidy. Direct regulation approach. Technology forces standards set primarily on the basis of health considerations, assumes that one of the regulators have set standards that the industry will be forced and develop the technology needed for them. And then technology-driven standards attempt to achieve greatest levels of improvement with technology, like the existing technology. And then Environment Protection Agency, which is the EPA. It's the federal agency responsible for conducting an integral, coordinated attack on all forms of environmental pollution, and then operates under a policy statement, and its agents look for significant environmental harm. And then final policy and penalty regulation encourage firms to engage in environmental self-auditing. And then regulating water safety, Safe Drinking Act, which sets standards for drinking water supplied by public water supply systems. And it requires the EPA to set 2 levels of drinking water standards: the primary standard, which is to protect human health, and the secondary standard to protect aesthetic quality of drinking water.